January 2025. Marina Mabrey sits down for an interview and finally says the words people wanted to hear 6 months ago. She admits the shove on Caitlin Clark was shameful. She acknowledges she crossed the line. On the surface, it sounds like growth, like accountability arriving fashionably late but still genuine. Except the moment you hear her explanation, the entire confession unravels. She frames it as emotion, as frustration from losing, as a reaction to Clark energizing Indiana and making her team look bad. And that's the problem. Because what she just described isn't a basketball play that got out of hand. It's an admission that she couldn't handle the other side winning, so she took a shot at their best player after the whistle had already killed the play. The tape doesn't lie. September 2024, playoff basketball, dead ball situation. Clark compromised with contact to the face, and then the body check comes from behind anyway. Mabrey just told us exactly what it looked like. Personal, targeted, and 6 months too late to call it anything but reputation management. So let's break down what really happened, why the timing matters, and what this delayed apology actually exposes about the WNBA's cultural problem. September 2024, Connecticut Sun versus Indiana Fever. Playoff intensity, everything on the line, and tensions running high from the opening tip. Early in the game, there's a loose ball scramble. Contact happens, minimal and routine. The kind of play that happens 20 times a night. Mabrey hits the floor. But watch what happens next. She doesn't just get up and reset. She springs up with a different energy entirely. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video. Like something just shifted from competitive to personal. That's the first signal that the temperature is changing. Not because of what happened, but because of how she's processing it. Fast forward to the sequence everyone remembers. Clark drives, takes contact up high, gets caught in the face. For a moment, she's visibly disoriented, eyes watering, turning away from the action as her body tries to process what just happened. The whistle blows. Dead ball. Everyone on the court knows it. The play is over. That should be the reset point, the moment where players separate and officials step in. Instead, that's exactly when the hit comes. A full body check from behind, delivered to a player who isn't engaged in live action anymore, who's literally facing the other direction trying to recover from contact to the face. And here's the detail that makes it even worse on replay. Tina Charles is already there. She's already in position, already sending whatever message Connecticut thinks needs sending. Mabrey's shove isn't even necessary from a basketball standpoint. It's redundant, which means it's not about the game anymore. It's about making sure Clark feels it. The crowd reaction is immediate, not because they're soft or new to physical basketball, but because they just watched something that didn't belong in that moment. The boos that follow aren't random fan behavior. They're a collective response to watching a player get targeted after the whistle. And the arena doesn't forget. Every time Mabrey touches the ball after that, the building lets her know exactly how they saw it. Not as playoff intensity, not as competitive fire, as a cheap shot delivered when the other player was vulnerable and the play was already dead. That's what actually happened in September. No interpretation needed, just the sequence of events, clear as day on tape. 6 months. That's how long it took for Marina Mabrey to publicly address what happened. Not 6 days, not 6 weeks. Half a year of silence while the clip circulated, the criticism built, and her reputation in Indiana turned toxic. So when the apology finally arrives in January 2025, the first question isn't whether she means it. It's why now? What changed between September and January that suddenly made accountability possible? The answer isn't complicated. Free agency, market perception, the realization that walking into Gainbridge Fieldhouse had become a legitimate career liability. Because here's what happened in the aftermath of that playoff game. Connecticut went back to Indiana and got destroyed. The crowd was relentless. The boos weren't just loud, they were personal, sustained. The kind of hostile environment that rattles even veteran players. Mabrey describes it in her interview, how miserable it felt, how the entire night became about that one moment. And you can hear it in her voice. That's the part that stuck with her. Not what happened to Clark, the consequences she faced. Real accountability shows up immediately. It doesn't wait for the news cycle to cool down or for contract negotiations to start warming up. It doesn't arrive only after you've calculated the cost of staying silent. When someone genuinely recognizes they crossed the line, the remorse is instant, uncomfortable, and public, because they understand the damage was done in public and needs to be addressed the same way. Mabrey had 6 months to say something. 6 months where she could have owned it, explained it, and moved forward with her reputation intact. She chose silence instead. And that silence tells you everything about what this apology actually is. It's not a moral reckoning, it's brand management. It's the recognition that being unplayable in one of the league's most important markets is a problem that affects your value, your next contract, and your long-term career trajectory. The confession didn't come from watching the tape and feeling shame. It came from watching the consequences pile up and realizing they weren't going away. So when Mabrey finally says the words, they land differently than they would have in September, because now they're wrapped in context. Now they arrive with a motive that has nothing to do with Caitlin Clark and everything to do with Marina Mabrey's next payday. That's not accountability. That's damage control with a 6-month delay. Here's where the apology completely falls apart. Mabrey doesn't just admit she went too far, she explains why. And the explanation is worse than the silence ever was. She says her team was losing. She says Clark was energizing Indiana, hyping up her teammates, making the Fever look good while Connecticut was struggling. She describes it as Clark low-key punking them. And all of that frustration, all of that emotion from watching the game slip away, that's what she says drove the shove. Read that back slowly. She just admitted that her response to losing a basketball game was to body-check the opposing team's best player after the whistle. Not during a live play, not in the heat of a contested rebound or a fight for position. After the play was dead, after Clark had already taken contact to the face and was visibly compromised. That's when Mabrey decided the message needed to be sent. That is not competitive fire. That is not playoff intensity. That is ego taking over when the scoreboard isn't cooperating. And the wildest part is she frames this like it's a reasonable explanation, like fans are supposed to hear, "I was frustrated because we were losing," and suddenly understand why the cheap shot made sense. Except it does the opposite. It confirms exactly what people were saying in real time. The contact around Clark all season wasn't about basketball. It was about resentment, about veterans who couldn't handle the spotlight shifting, about players who decided that if they couldn't beat her on the scoreboard, they'd make sure she felt it physically. Mabrey even tries to compare this incident to another moment where she got into it with an opponent, framing that one as controlled aggression that fueled her team without crossing the line. But the distinction she's trying to make actually proves the point. Face-to-face confrontation during live action is competition. A blindside hit after the whistle is retaliation. One happens because the game is intense. The other happens because you've lost control. And the fact that she still doesn't seem to fully grasp that difference tells you the apology isn't rooted in understanding. It's rooted in regret about consequences. She's not sorry she did it. She's sorry it backfired. Sorry the crowd turned. Sorry her name became synonymous with dirty play in a market she has to compete in. That is not the same thing as accountability. If this were the first time Marina Mabrey lost her composure when things weren't going her way, maybe the emotional explanation would hold more weight. But it's not the first time. Not even close. There's a pattern here that stretches beyond one playoff shove. And once you see it, the whole "I just got caught up in the moment" defense starts to crumble. Go back through her career, and you'll find other moments where frustration turned into something extra. The near altercation with Alyssa Thomas, where teammates had to step in before it escalated into something the league couldn't ignore. Multiple sequences where the physicality crossed from tough defense into reckless contact, where the line between playing hard and playing angry became impossible to distinguish. These aren't one-off emotional reactions. They're a temperature gauge that shows what happens when Mabrey feels like she's losing control of the game. And here's the bigger context that makes this pattern matter even more. Caitlin Clark's entire rookie season was marked by this exact dynamic: excessive contact, late hits, veterans sending messages. Over and over, the narrative was framed as "welcome to the league physicality," as if every rookie gets the same treatment and Clark just needed to toughen up. Except the tape tells a different story. The contact around her was higher. The shots came later. The extra shove after the whistle happened more frequently. And when fans pointed it out, they got lectured about not understanding physical basketball. Mabrey's shove wasn't an isolated incident in Clark's season. It was the most visible example of a culture problem the league didn't want to address, because addressing it would mean admitting that the treatment wasn't standard, that some of the veteran response to Clark's arrival wasn't competitive. It was personal. That resentment over attention and spotlight was showing up as targeted physicality, and the officials were letting it slide because calling it consistently would have meant acknowledging the bias. The comparison people made to the Jordan rules isn't as dramatic as it sounds. Detroit built an identity around intimidation. In the moment, they defended it as competitive basketball. Years later, some of those same players admitted it crossed lines. The echo here is obvious. The culture allows the line to move when the target is someone the old guard hasn't fully accepted yet. And by the time accountability shows up, the damage is already done and the pattern is already established. When the shove happened in September, the immediate reaction from certain corners of the basketball world wasn't outrage. It was defense. Analysts rushed to frame it as playoff basketball. Commentators said Clark needed to learn that physicality is part of the game. Former players lectured new fans about not understanding how the WNBA operates. Some voices even suggested that the real problem wasn't the hit itself, but the overreaction from people who clearly didn't know what they were watching. Those takes aged terribly, because now, 6 months later, the person who actually delivered the shove is calling it shameful. If Marina Mabrey herself admits it crossed the line, then everyone who defended it in real time wasn't protecting the integrity of physical basketball. They were protecting a narrative. The narrative that Caitlin Clark doesn't get special treatment, that she's not a victim, that the attention around her is overblown, and the fans supporting her don't understand the game. So where's the accountability from those voices now? Where are the media members who were loud in September and silent in January? Where are the former players who co-signed the "she deserved it" energy when the whistle had already killed the play? That silence is the whole story. Because if they were wrong then, and they clearly were, admitting it now means acknowledging they let bias cloud their judgment. It means admitting they defended dirty play specifically because of who was on the receiving end. And that gets to the heart of the cultural problem. The league spent Clark's entire rookie season trying to manage two conflicting realities. On one hand, she was driving attendance, spiking viewership, and bringing mainstream attention the WNBA has been chasing for years. On the other hand, she was disrupting the established hierarchy, and some people in and around the league couldn't handle that shift. So instead of protecting the product and the player generating all that growth, the response was to let veterans teach her a lesson and frame any criticism of that approach as fans being soft. The result was predictable. New fans showed up, saw their favorite player getting targeted with little protection, and started asking why the standards seemed so inconsistent. Why the same play called one way for Clark and another way for everyone else? Why the league's biggest star was absorbing contact that would draw immediate technicals if it happened to other marquee players? And instead of honest answers, they got condescension and gatekeeping. Marina Mabrey's late apology isn't just about repairing her image with fans. It's about repairing her value in free agency. Because here's the uncomfortable reality front offices have to consider when evaluating her now. Temperament isn't just a personality trait. It's a competitive asset or liability, depending on how it shows up under pressure. And what the tape shows, what her own explanation confirms, is that when things go wrong, Mabrey's frustration doesn't fuel better basketball. It turns into decision-making that creates problems for her team. Put yourself in the position of a general manager trying to build a contender. You're not just asking whether Mabrey can score or defend. You're asking whether she can handle adversity without becoming a distraction. Whether a bad quarter turns into a technical foul. Whether a playoff loss turns into a reputation crisis that follows your franchise into hostile arenas. Because Indiana isn't a random road game anymore. With Caitlin Clark, the Fever became a centerpiece franchise. Gainbridge Fieldhouse is one of the loudest, most engaged buildings in the league now, and Mabrey's name is mud there. Any team that signs her has to factor in that walking into that arena means dealing with sustained hostility. That matters in a league where a few possessions can flip a playoff series. It matters when you're trying to build chemistry and focus, and one of your players is getting booed every time she touches the ball because of something she did 6 months ago that she still hasn't fully owned. That's not a small thing. That's a competitive disadvantage you're voluntarily taking on. And it's not just Indiana. It's the broader perception problem. Mabrey is now the face of the dirty play conversation around Clark's rookie season. Fairly or not, that's the association. Highlight reels, social media clips, think pieces, all of it loops back to that September moment. For a player trying to maximize her value in free agency, that's a massive problem. Because teams aren't just buying your production, they're buying your brand, your reputation, and how you fit into their larger market strategy. The apology is an attempt to rehab that brand, to show teams she's self-aware, that she understands what went wrong, that it won't be an ongoing issue. But apologies without changed behavior are just words. And if the next time Mabrey's team is losing and the frustration builds, the same pattern emerges, this confession will be remembered as PR strategy, not personal growth. Here's the reality the WNBA keeps avoiding. Caitlin Clark's arrival was the biggest growth opportunity the league has had in years, maybe ever. Attendance numbers exploded. Viewership jumped across every platform. Mainstream media that had ignored women's basketball for decades suddenly couldn't stop talking about it. Sponsors started paying attention. Arenas that used to be half empty were selling out. All of that momentum, all of that energy, all of that potential, it came with one player as the catalyst. And the league's response to how she was treated physically was inadequate. Not just in one game, all season long. The contact was excessive. The officiating was inconsistent, and every time fans pointed it out, the conversation got redirected. Instead of asking whether the physicality around Clark was appropriate, the question became whether she could handle it. Instead of evaluating whether veterans were crossing lines, the focus shifted to whether new fans understood the game. The framing was backwards from the start, because here's what should have been obvious. When your biggest star, the player driving all this new attention, is absorbing dead ball cheap shots, and the response is, that's just playoff basketball. You're not protecting the product. You're telling the audience that growth matters less than ego, that the old guard's comfort matters more than the new fan's experience. That narrative control is more important than player safety, and that's a choice. The league could have set a clear standard from day one. Consistent, flagrant reviews. Real consequences for late hits. The same protective calls that other sports leagues give their marquee players without hesitation. Instead, the approach was to let things play out, let veterans send their messages, and hope the controversy didn't overshadow the growth. It backfired. The controversy became the story. And now, 6 months later, one of the players involved is trying to apologize her way out of the consequences. If the WNBA wants to sustain this growth, the culture has to tighten up. That means consistent standards that don't bend based on who's involved. It means officials calling dead ball contact the same way every time, not adjusting the threshold because they think a player needs to be welcome to the league. It means media voices being honest about what they're watching instead of defending plays they know cross the line. And it means the league office recognizing that protection isn't coddling, it's business strategy. Marina Mabrey's apology doesn't change what happened. It confirms it. She admitted, in her own words, that frustration over losing led her to body-check Caitlin Clark after the whistle. That's not accountability, that's confession without consequence. And the 6-month delay between the incident and the apology tells you everything about what motivated it. Not remorse, reputation management. Because the real cost wasn't what happened to Clark. It was the boos, the backlash, and the free agency implications that followed. But this isn't just about one player or one moment. It's about what the WNBA allows when growth and ego collide. Clark's rookie season exposed a culture problem the league still hasn't addressed. Inconsistent officiating, targeted physicality, media narratives protecting veterans over the product, and a refusal to admit that resentment was showing up as late hits and cheap shots. Mabrey calling it shameful 6 months later doesn't fix the pattern. It just proves the fans were right all along. The question now is whether the league learns from it or whether this cycle repeats the next time someone disrupts the hierarchy, because the audience is watching. And their patience isn't unlimited. Stay locked in with my channel, Simply Explained, your home for the truth behind the WNBA headlines.